Hi, my name is Jessie Ketchum. I'm a graduate student at Morningside College. I'm also the K-12 Literacy Curriculum Lead at College Community Schools, and today I want to present my findings on the effect of syntactic analysis instruction with students in upper elementary on reading comprehension abilities. So we know that reading proficiency is very important, and unfortunately, the National Assessment for Educational Progress report found that 64% of American fourth graders are not proficient readers. To be proficient at reading, you need to be able to accurately decode as well as comprehend a text. And Kane and Oakhill found that comprehension comes at 3 levels. You need to understand the words, the sentences, and the discourse level of a text. Unfortunately, Scott found that many teachers are skipping over that sentence level comprehension, and that made me wonder if it's this omission of instruction that's really impacting why 64% of students are not achieving reading proficiency. Personally, I was interested in this topic for a variety of reasons. I had several PLCs asking me what they should be doing for grammar. I was also doing a book study, and I had read a blog post that were all circling around this idea of how grammar could help support reading comprehension. And I thought if I could put all these pieces together, I might be able to support both my PLCs and my students. So why should we care about reading comprehension? We know that it has an impact on students' self-esteem and social standing. We also know that when students aren't good comprehenders, they're more likely to drop out. And this can negatively impact them into their future life as well if that reading comprehension is not remediated, as adults can struggle with technical reading, or they can struggle with supporting their own children with reading assignments, and that can impact their self-esteem even further. So to support reading comprehension, we have to understand reading comprehension. The simple view of reading basically says that in order to make meaning from a text, you need to first be able to decode the text, and then you need to be able to understand language as well. Now, language comprehension is a huge topic, which is why I turned to Kilpatrick to kind of get a better understanding of what the specific pieces are. And within this model, I found that idea of grammatical or syntactical knowledge. And that's kind of my justification for why I thought that syntax instruction could help support students with reading comprehension. So I went to the research to figure out what does research say about if syntax and reading comprehension are correlated, and I found mixed results. There were several different studies that said no, that it's not correlated at all, that vocabulary and memory are more predictive of comprehension than syntax. However, there was also a whole body of research out there that said yes, it is correlated. Up to 33% of the variance in students' comprehension abilities could be accounted for their syntax understanding. And when I thought of this, along with that idea of the 3 different levels of text comprehension, word, sentence, and discourse level, I really leaned more towards that idea that yes, there is a correlation. So I decided I wanted to really figure out, can I teach students skills that would improve their syntactic awareness, and would that improve their comprehension? And what I found was there was a gap in the research. All of the studies that I had found were really looking at students' innate syntactical awareness and the correlation with comprehension. No one had really talked about if you could teach syntax skills or syntactical awareness, and if that would support reading comprehension. So my study really aimed to answer that question of, does explicit instruction with 3rd and 4th grade students on sentence structure help to improve their reading comprehension more than just strategy instruction alone? And my hypothesis was that if students in 3rd or 4th grade received explicit instruction in syntactic awareness of sentences and grade-appropriate text, that their scores would improve on those measures of reading comprehension more than what we would see with the control group, because the control group was missing that medial level of instruction with comprehension at the sentence level. To study this, I did a quantitative experimental research design with a control group. This was appropriate because I had sufficient students for an experimental study, and I wanted to have that control group so I could have that comparison to see if syntax instruction was more effective than just the control group, which was summarizing. So for my variables, my independent variables was the timing of the assessment, comparing baseline to summative, as well as the type of reading instruction that students got. The control group focused on summarizing, which was an extension of their core instruction, and then the experimental group was looking at syntax. My dependent variable that I was measuring was reading comprehension. My participants were 36 3rd and 4th grade students. There was 24 3rd graders and 12 4th graders. They were predominantly female with 25 females, as well as predominantly Caucasian with 86.2% Caucasian. I didn't have any special ed or ELL students, and there was no incentive to participate. My students were selected based on the fact that I wanted them to be proficient decoders, and I didn't want them to be persistently at risk on FAST because I wanted them to really be at the comprehension level of instruction. For grouping, I took those 36 participants and I randomly assigned them to either the experimental or the control group just using a random name generator. And then because I had so many third graders, I had to further subdivide them into instructional groups that were 6 students each. For my materials, I had several different assessments that I had to use. Both the FAST and the 95% group screening, phonics screening inventory were used for me to identify my participants. And so for FAST, it has a reliability measure of 0.79, and then it has a construct validity median coefficient of 0.78 when it was compared to MAP. Unfortunately, 95% group wasn't able to provide me with reliability and validity measures even when I asked them directly. Beyond just selecting my participants, I also wanted to have some data for my baseline and my summative measure, and so for that I used timed reading plus probes. And this was just a basic measure of comprehension. There was 2 different passages. Passage A had 10 questions that were multiple choice. It looked at literal and inferential thinking. Passage B was more skill focused. It had 15 points, and it looked at things like determining fact from opinion, inferring the meaning of words, main idea, those types of things. And again, unfortunately, Timed Readings Plus did not offer any reliability or validity measures. Beyond my assessments, I also used an Excel data sheet for recording my information. There was general classroom furniture like a kidney-shaped table where I did my instruction, whiteboards, paper, those types of things. And the main instructional materials that I used were my researcher-designed lesson plans. So there's 2 different lesson plans. The Syntactic Features lesson plan was used for my experimental group. You can see that it has components like activating background knowledge, pre-teaching vocabulary. It used the gradual release model where the teacher was modeling elements of syntactic awareness. There was a comprehension discussion and then writing about the text. This lesson plan was used for 28 passages. They were all grade appropriate passages, and they were more heavily nonfiction than fiction just because they had more complex sentences, more material for students to analyze. I used those same 28 passages for the control group, but they had a focus more on summarizing, which was an extension of their core instruction. You notice the lesson plan looks very similar though, with activating background knowledge, pre-teaching vocabulary, the teacher read aloud with the focus on summarizing now, a comprehension discussion, and then writing about the text. For my procedure, I had to start by identifying my participants and assigning them to groups, just like I've already discussed. I had to train several different classroom teachers to administer the intervention since I was not the one who was actually leading those. There was 1 3rd grade teacher who was able to cover all of the 3rd grade participants, and then 2 4th grade teachers. We then collected baseline data using 1 set of timed readings plus probes, both Passage A and Passage B. We needed to control for all other literacy experiences, so all students had the same 15 minutes of interactive read aloud, 25 minutes of shared reading, 20 minutes of writing, 15 minutes of independent reading, and then their 15 minutes of small group instruction. The teachers conducted the lessons for 28 instructional days, and then we collected summative data using a 2nd set of timed readings plus probes, both Passage A and Passage B, and then we debriefed on the results. For analyzing my data, I used an independent samples t-test to check for equivalence at the baseline, and then a 2-way ANOVA. Since there was a significant interaction effect, I also had to do a 2-key post-hoc analysis for Passage A. So I started with looking at my baseline data. I wanted to determine if I had statistically equivalent groups. And it was interesting because Passage A said no, that there was something that was not statistically equivalent, with the control group having an average of 8 points and the experimental group only having 6.39 points for that baseline mean. Passage B, you can see that the scores are much more equivalent, 7.89 and 7.39. So it was interesting from the beginning having different results about whether or not I had equivalent groups. So then I looked at the summative data using my ANOVA. And so for Passage A, there wasn't a significant finding for the main effect of the reading intervention. There was a significant finding for the main effect of the time of the assessment. So there was significant growth from baseline to summative. For Passage A, there was also a significant interaction effect, showing that the 2 were about to intersect. So I did that post hoc 2-key, but the post hoc 2-key said that it could not confirm that significant interaction effect, that the means did not differ significantly. Because the means did not differ significantly, my hypothesis was not supported. Based on this analysis, the experimental group did not grow more significantly than the control group. For Passage B, I had similar findings. There was not a significant effect for the main effect of the reading intervention, but there was for the time, showing growth from baseline to summative. However, with Passage B, there wasn't any interaction effects, so again, the hypothesis was not supported. So overall, what I found was that explicit syntax instruction did produce statistically significant gains in comprehension. From the baseline to the summative measure, students increased their scores. However, those gains were not statistically equivalent, or those gains were statistically equivalent from the control and experimental group. So this is why my hypothesis was not supported, because both groups, control and experimental, grew from that baseline to the summative measure. So when I put this within the context of the research that I had done, I felt that my study confirmed that finding of a correlation. There was growth from the baseline to the summative measure. And the fact that there wasn't a strong interaction effect for both passages doesn't necessarily negate the fact that there was a positive correlation. It just meant there's a positive correlation for both the experimental and the control group. My research also extends beyond the research that I had conducted in the fact that it showed that explicit instruction could develop syntactic awareness. It was a teachable skill that could support comprehension. I also wanted to do some digging into why I had such different results for Passage A and Passage B. So what I found was that they measured different things about comprehension. Passage A was really just the straight up literal and inferential thinking. And so what I found was that as students automatized that idea of decomposing complex sentences, they increased their cognitive ability to make meaning from the text, to focus more on comprehension, which is why I think I could see greater growth in my experimental group. They were really able to break down that text more automatically and understand the story. The other thing I wondered then was why Passage B didn't have a stronger result for the control group. Passage B specifically analyzed questions on main idea. And what I think there is the fact that because students were automatizing those skills of being able to decompose complex sentence in the experimental group, they were able to continue to understand the story and make better meaning from it. And in order to show better gains on Passage B, we would have needed to do more explicit instruction on the skills being measured. So fact and opinion and inferring word meaning and those types of things. It just wasn't the focus of this study. So then I wanted to tie back to that idea of student zone of proximal development. We know that there's 3 different levels of text comprehension, with sentence being that medial level. And so what I found was that sentence level and the discourse level groups produce the same level of growth. And that didn't really align with my thinking about this zone of proximal development. I had predicted that the syntax group would do better than the control group because they were getting support within their zone of proximal development. I had 2 possible explanations. The first was that perhaps my group in particular didn't need syntax instruction, in which case they were in their zone of proximal development. They were beyond that already. My second explanation was that maybe sentence level comprehension really isn't part of a scaffolding step in students' zone of proximal development. I don't really believe that one a lot, though, just for the fact that it seems hard to believe that students could skip over understanding at the sentence level and make larger meaning from the text. It just doesn't seem to align with the other research. So I would go more with explanation number 1. So in general, the zone of proximal development is not negated. It's just that we need to continue to look at what is the role of syntax or sentence level comprehension within students' zone of proximal development. So my implication for participants is that syntax is an effective focus for instruction, that scores improved a statistically significant amount from baseline to control group. Syntax isn't the only intervention they could do, though. The summarizing group also produced a statistically significant growth. And while it wasn't the emphasis, there was other elements of the lesson plan that I think were effective, such as vocabulary, activating background knowledge, wide exposure to text, so those should be included in students' instruction when possible as well. For educators, the implication is that we really need to have a balanced approach to instruction. Strategy instruction, we know, does have a positive effect, and we saw that within this study, at least with the summarizing strategy. At the same time, syntax instruction also produced positive gains. So students should be exposed to both types of instruction, especially considering the fact that we have so many diverse students and they have diverse skill needs. For administrators, the implication is that we need to support educators with providing this instruction. We know that they're not as familiar with delivering instruction with syntax, and so teachers need professional learning and they need resources because we know that highly trained teachers produce student achievement, and so teachers need support in order to meet this goal of balanced instruction. Now, my study wasn't perfect. There were some limitations. We know that there wasn't equivalent groups at the baseline. The fact that I didn't collect syntax or data on syntactical awareness hindered me because I didn't know if students were in their zone of proximal development. Students also could have benefited from more practice with the comprehension assessment tool so that I could make sure I was really getting a true measure of skill and not their familiarity with the test. The lack of validity and reliability of the timed readings plus is a hindrance because I'm not sure how accurately it measures reading comprehension. And then just in general, I would like the study to go longer in order to get a better picture of students' growth. To fix these problems, I could replicate my study but increase it to a year long so that I could really look at those growth patterns and make sure that I had equivalent groups. I would want to make sure that I was comparing my syntax intervention to other comprehension strategies as I developed that idea of a control. And then I want to look at students' growth in their writing to see the potential of syntax instruction outside of reading comprehension.